This is sent to you and...
All right, let me go back here. All right, that was 4:15 you sent that one.
The first time I
Got it. Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
Okay.
How you doing, John?
Good evening. This is the Wednesday, June 4th, 2025 meeting of the Capital Improvements Planning Committee. 6 o'clock start, uncharacteristically, normally a 7 o'clock start, but we have a 7 o'clock Finance Committee meeting following our Capital Improvement Planning Committee. We're at the Public Safety Complex at 576 Pleasant Street, also with a Zoom link. We are a committee of 7 members. There are 5 present at the Public Safety Complex, and 1 is joining us via Zoom. That is 6. 4 is a quorum. I declare we have a quorum, and we're open for business. So, with that, we have some capital-related warrant articles that have been sent to all of you this afternoon. Hopefully you've had some occasion to check your email.
Was that a shot across the bow?
Well, I know everybody's busy and everybody has jobs and we're volunteers here, so
You there, man?
you may have had a heart attack when you saw the 90-page document coming through and all manner of Capital Improvement Planning Committee having to opine on all of the warrant articles. That was an oversight. We do not have to opine on all of them or vote approval or disapproval. Our responsibility is directed to those that are identified as capital warrant articles, and they start on page 6, but more importantly, Article 12. And I believe Heather has it up on the board right now. I've also, and I think it's important for some reference for you to also resend to you our Capital Improvement Planning Committee annual report that we submitted to the Select Board back on March 20th. And articles that appear here cannot appear if they did not appear in our particular report. So first order of business is the Article 12, the capital for the HVAC system at the library. That is as it appears on what was our number 1, but not in order of priority, but identified number 1 in our Capital Improvement Planning Committee report. If you don't mind, I would like to do 2 things. One is to not have to read all of these articles, but to ask for a motion to be made at an appropriate time for the article as it reads, as it appears on the screen or in your print copy. I'd also like to, with your permission, dispense with Robert's rules. And typically what that calls for is for a motion to be made, a second to be made, and then the discussion ensues. I think in many instances, this being one, I think it's particularly useful if we reverse that and have the discussion that could lead to a particular motion for either approval or disapproval. So with that, entertain whether or not there is any discussion regarding Article 12. as appears on the screen and as appears in your packet.
I remember we had a conversation about the capital, some having to be 10,000 or more, and that this is 5,000. Remind me, I know we talked about that the...
David, is the mic on?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, I know we talked about that the total amount to fix the HVAC would be over 10,000. I don't recall where the other amount is coming from, and is that still valid?
No, it is, because I think the over, you make a very good point. If it's not $10,000, it doesn't come before us, but the ask was, I think, 15,000 and change, and the library trustee voted to use some of their trust funds
Right.
to subsidize 10,000 of it, and asked that we participate at the $5,000 level. So I believe it meets all the criteria of our bylaws. Good,
Okay.
you raise a good point.
Yep. And that trust fund amount still exists?
Yes.
Okay.
Another good point based on what's happened
Right,
in the last
right.
3 weeks.
Right.
We may have pillaged everything in town. You dig up all those cans in your backyard.
Yeah. So this was one of the articles we sent to the select board.
Yep.
Okay, so we're reviewing it to see if we want to change our position?
Yes. We vote to approve, disapprove, take no action. And typically, I would ask that we convey to those, in the event that we do take no action, as to what the reason behind that is.
Okay, I have just a question, I guess. It's been described to me several times in meetings that I've attended that I'm not really sure how municipal finances work. On several occasions, it just says, you just don't get it, Neil, and I'm there, okay, so. My concern, I'm starting now with this one at $5,000, because again, this is kind of minor, but we have other articles coming up. If this isn't funded from capital depreciation, can you enlighten me if there are other sources, particularly as we go forward? There are bigger amounts on bigger projects, but let's just start with the basics, if you could help me.
Yep, there are no other sources. So
Okay.
it's either we approve this as it reads, which I would remind everybody that aside from legal counsel doing their thing to make sure that it meets muster in that regard, it's pretty much exactly as we put in our committee report.
Okay.
We recommended 5,000, and we recommended that it come from the capital depreciation fund. That's what this is.
Okay.
Don't want to persuade the motion, but I think we're good to go.
Okay. Then I would present a motion to approve the article as written with its funding source.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor? I think we're going to need to do a roll call. So Bill?
I approve.
Forrest?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Neil?
Yes.
Heather?
yes,
Mark votes yes. Passed unanimously. So I'd kind of like, if you'll allow me to take advantage of what we decided to do with regard to the discussion, I would submit to you that Article 13 and 14, which were in our Capital Improvement Planning Committee report, but the funding recommendation that we made to the Select Board is vastly different than what the Article 13 and 14 in particular reads.
Could you refresh the public that may be joining us as to what our recommendation was?
Our recommendation that each of these would be capital exclusions, which would be subject to a different kind of vote. Here, the select board is recommending that we use capital depreciation funds. And I think it's important to note that the capital depreciation fund has a starting balance of $106,000. Keeping in mind that last fall at the special town meeting, $69,000 was voted into that fund to bring it up to 106. With Article 12, 13, and 14, the Select Board, of which we've already approved Article 12, the Select Board is recommending that $5,000 come from the Capital Depreciation Fund for Article 12. $67,000 comes from the Capital Depreciation Fund in Article 13. $30,000 come from the Capital Depreciation Fund with Article 14, leaving the Capital Depreciation Fund, if those three were passed as they read, with a balance of $4,000, with no assurances, no guarantee, nothing in the future of any certainty that any funds would be available to replenish that particular fund. So I've long advocated, and so have many of you, so pardon the I word, that this particular fund should have $500,000 to it. And we did everything we could to build it up to 106, and now it's being proposed that we drive it down to $4,000. I struggle with that mightily, because at $4,000, I have no idea. First of all, it's outside of the Capital Improvement Planning Committee domain because it's not above $10,000. And I beg the question, what could you possibly ever purchase for $4,000? I think we're in favor, and I wouldn't want the public to think that we're opposed to a boiler in a school system. We're not. It is in our report, but we recommended that it be a capital exclusion, and that's not how it reads, and I have a great deal of difficulty with how it reads, and I'll have a great deal of difficulty voting in favor of it.
Two questions, if I may.
Yep.
Where does the money come from in past years, other than at a town meeting to push that over last year, 69 grand? 10 years ago, 5 years ago, where did monies come from to go to the capital depreciation fund? Where do we transfer them from?
Recommendation is made by a variety of committees, the most of which would, of course, be the Select Board, to present to town meeting to take generally free cash.
So that's certified that comes in October.
So in the fall of last year, $638,000 of free cash was certified. Vote was made that $69,000 would go into stabilization, $69,000 would go into capital depreciation, and $500,000 would go into the budget that we just used to balance the budget.
Okay.
So,
All right. First question. Oh, thank you. Second question is just, again, for those watching at home that may not, I'm going to put myself in the category, may not fully understand all of the funding vehicles available to the town. Would you explain a debt exclusion, what that means to the residents?
we borrow the money to pay for it.
We need a town vote to do that.
Yes.
And we borrow it at market rates or municipal rates, or, I mean, who determines the rates?
Going rate.
All right, well, I've been around town for,
Heather has explained before that she shopped around for different rates.
understood,
Yeah,
okay.
So that's,
But
I assume that's what you do.
Heather, can you enlighten me a little bit on rate searches in terms of, is it a function of anything else?
Yeah, it's usually more of a bidding process piece. But just to clarify, so there's, when you think of Proposition 2.5, there's three things associated with it. The first is the general operating override, which is what we tried back in June and was unsuccessful, or May rather. The second is just what you mentioned, Neil, it's the debt exclusion. So that is over the course of essentially how long the select board decide that they can borrow for an asset, so it can't expand beyond, essentially the life of the asset.
Okay.
So that's a debt exclusion, but yes, once the item is paid for, it goes away.
Right, so
A
that does-
capital exclusion is what we've done in the past with, the Tiverton Field lights, and when we did the school security system
Yep.
back in 2022, those are capital. They were just one time, here's the money, here's the item, or what we're trying to purchase, we're all done. So it only hits the tax bills one time. But yeah, so the rates, you never really know where you're going to land on the rates. You can look around, see where municipalities are currently landing, and what the trends are for the rates, but generally we work very closely with bond counsel to figure all those pieces out.
Okay, is the bond rating for the town critical in determining any of these rates?
Yeah, the bond rating can most definitely impact the town's ability to borrow and the rate we end up with at the end of the day.
So Neil, you make a perfect segue. The bond rating would be impacted negatively by they look at stabilization fund balances and capital depreciation fund balances, and if we have a $4,000.
All right, well, I understand, but there was a meeting, I'm going to say 2 years ago, that I attended and sat and just listened, and at the time, the select board decided not to take from either of those funds because I think the expression or the statement was made, it directly affects the bond rating of the town.
Correct.
So, Heather, do you know what our current bond rating is as of June 5th, 4th, whatever the hell we're at today?
I'm not asked that question very often, Neil, so I don't have it off the top of my
No,
head.
no,
I can
but,
see it
all
back to you.
right, then can you give us an idea of, is it a AAA, AA, A, A plus, or, I'm just asking, because I'm assuming each of those ratings equate to some sort of interest rate that we would pay.
So there's two different systems out there. There's Moody's and then there's, what is it, Standard & Poor's? I think that's the other one. And it depends, and I can find out for you. I don't have it off the top of my head.
Okay, all right. I guess that's going to become a moot point because we're about to make some sort of decisions here. But I just, as I said, reflecting on, if memory served me correctly, and I made joke of it last night, but I am getting a little older and forget things, but I do remember that statement being made that we don't want to take money from some of these funds, and I call them like stabilization, capital reserve, whatever, all of these things, because it directly affects the bond rating of the town and the ability of the town to borrow money at, we'll say, competitive rates. So, having said that, I will turn it back to the chair for further discussion, but thank you for the input.
So let me throw this out. We do have, as you know, I think at the beginning, the option is to approve it, but I would remind everybody what that does to the capital depreciation fund. We could disapprove it, which has all manner of connotation in terms of what that means, or one of the suggestions is to hold it over. I think boilers are important all year long, but they may be a little less important right now in June with the warmer weather and school being let out shortly. And to revisit this in the fall when we know what our certified free cash is, and maybe we're in a better position to support that as it reads then, as opposed to now, and just decimate that particular fund.
Comment. Right now, I think would be an easier time to install because nobody's thinking about heating systems versus if we get to the fall and we have a cold snap or something like that and we run into an issue, the availability of, we're giving ourselves a buffer between now and the need for it in a heating season beginning, let's just say, end of October, early November. And if the special town meeting is not until November, to get it approved, we could be looking at an install in November or December, and that would really be a critical measure.
But don't we have the one boiler that's fully operational, has been rebuilt?
Completely rebuilt. Jeff and I were at the school when they showed us the rebuilt boiler.
And I would think that would, unless we got a Arctic
Right.
blast, we,
No, yeah, that's a good point, too, because, I mean, when we were there, they were talking about they only used 2 boilers in combination when it's extremely cold. So if we have just, normal weather through the fall or whatever, okay, that, wait, what, yeah.
So I don't want to go down the bond rabbit hole or the
Okay.
weather rabbit hole.
Yep.
So let's kind of bring it back to Senate.
One comment.
Yeah.
It's a good idea to wait, except for one thing. Is the price gonna go up by November?
that's very possible.
Absolutely. Price-
Well, and we don't know if the price now, 67 is
Yep, it
is
could have
current
went,
price.
could have went up already.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean,
Steel tariff.
This was March 20th when we went to
Yep.
our particular report.
But at that time, we were dealing with a quote that was provided back in the fall of '24. So we weren't even sure if that was, what we'll say, an accurate price. So, all right.
Mark,
Yes,
can I just add something on this one?
yes.
So I would say, my perspective is that I think it's very wise to consider purchasing this now and not waiting, right? This is for one of the assets we have in town, one of our buildings, the one that supports all of our students. In the event that something happens with the current one and we don't have this as a backup, we're gonna have way higher costs than simply replacing this boiler, because we're gonna have to find new locations for the students during the period of the winter when something fails, and we're gonna have to rehome them. It's gonna cost a lot more to do something. I think Neil alluded to it, and someone else might be as well, that, if you're doing something in an emergency repair, it's a lot higher. And I can tell you, when we did emergency repairs at the library, that was a nightmare, and most likely much higher cost than what we would have paid had we planned something out. So, I know we haven't gone for a vote yet, but, I strongly support supporting this article from CIPC and getting this taken care of now.
So what's your comment or reaction to the depleting the capital depreciation fund by well over half, by 60%?
Well, I think we have the funds and they're there for this purpose. I understand that, everything can impact the bond rating, but by buying it this way, we don't have to worry about the bond rating at this moment, because we don't need to go out for bond. The other thing to take into consideration is there's many assets and factors that play into the bond rating. And nowadays with municipalities, unfortunately, one spot we're going to be weak on is they even look at the OPEB funding and the liability there. So, there's things we're good at, things we're not so good at. And I think, at the end of the day, this is something we really need to do. And I understand it depletes the capital depreciation fund by more than half, but at the same time, we have it there to essentially, in this case, save us from having even higher costs later on. I think it's a lot better to pay $67,000 and prepare for replacing one of the boilers and moving forward with that project and getting everything in play than waiting for a catastrophe to happen, and then costs are way higher than we would have anticipated, and we're going to be depleting all funds.
Yeah, I agree with Heather.
Okay, I kind of feel that way too, based on my original premise.
So is there a motion?
I'll make the motion to approve
As it reads?
this as it reads
Yep.
from the capital depreciation fund.
Vote to approve the article as it reads. Bill?
Well, we need a second, don't we?
Yeah, I would second, a good point.
I'll second it.
Yep, okay.
And I'll vote
Any
yes.
further discussion?
One question. As it reads right now, there's no way to replace that money if we get to the fall meeting with certified free cash to put that money back. Because your thought was wait until the fall and then take it when we have free cash, spend it right then and
No,
there.
you can, those are two separate issues.
Separate
You
issues,
can
all
do
right.
whatever you want in the fall.
Okay, all right, just for the clarification, thank you.
So, motion's been made and second. All in favor, Bill?
Yes.
Forrest?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Neil?
Yes.
Heather?
Yes.
Mark abstains. 14. Again, we put this forward in terms of, you recall, this reads now two police cruisers. Essentially at a cost, you got $90,000 and $30,000 in the article. So to clarify, it was two SUVs at $45,000 each, which is the approximate cost net of trade-in. And they would be paid for over a 3-year lease, so $90,000 divided by 3 years is the $30,000 that you see here. Here again, we made a recommendation that this be a capital exclusion. Here it is being recommended that the first payment be taken out of capital depreciation, which now depletes the amount down to $4,000, and that the two remaining annual payments be taken out of the police department's operating budget, which was not in our original recommendation. Recall that the consideration, which I think is academic at this point, was whether or not we would recommend putting forward no cruises, 1 cruiser, 2 cruises, 3 cruises, take a pass and skip a year. All of those were under consideration. We landed at 2, but this is not what we recommended. I would submit to you, my difficulty is it further depletes the capital depreciation fund to, I think, is a useless balance of $4,000. And we just came off of the FY26 budget, and I would submit to you there's no room for this in the 27 or 28 budget of the police department unless something significant happens, which could occur, but all things remaining equal, there's not room in the operating budget for this to be subsidized. So those are my problems that I wrestle with regarding this particular article.
I guess, once we start, if this approves and they lease the 2 vehicles, we're tied in for the next 2 years for that 60 grand. And the proposal now is to take it out of operations budget for the PD, correct? That's how this reads.
That's how this reads, yes.
All right, so in lieu of what just
So let
transpired,
me ask, point of clarification, Heather. Can the second and third year funding mechanism be changed? Or does this particular article as it reads supersede any consideration for changes in year 2 and 3?
So it all comes down, since the select board already voted this as essentially the language for the article, it comes down to the moderator's decision on whether he would believe that a modification of this into the form of a motion is within the 4 corners of the article. So sometimes the moderators will say, yes, you know, if you're keeping the amount, you're just changing the funding source, that's okay. Sometimes they're going to say, well, if you change the funding source, then the warrant article didn't give proper notice, and without proper notice, it's not within the 4 corners. So we can always, if it's a question that CIPC has, Mark, you or I, or on behalf of CIPC, can pop our moderator a quick email with a copy of the article and ask him to opine on whether he would be willing to accept a motion that had a different funding source for the second 2 years.
So we're in discussion.
okay, so Heather, just to follow up on that, this is Neil. If we approve, and the select board's already approved last night, And it goes to town meeting, and again, it gets approved, so that once we sign the papers and the cruisers show up here, the first 30K comes out of capital depreciation, but next year, we don't know if it can't be put into the operating budget because of the situations we're going through presently. I don't see it getting any better next year or the year after unless something happens that, we don't plan on, but we're kind of on the hook at this. There's no turning back because it's, once the car shows up, we have it, or the cruiser, we have it. So I'm looking for the possibility of taking, I'm going to say disapproval, but to be able to make a motion on the floor to find a different funding source. Because we could be tied into this, and there's no, I mean, that 60K could be a half of a police
We're
officer.
tied into a lot of things, Neil, that extend beyond this year. I think it's handled like anything else is budgeted. It gets rolled in, it's an expense that is a starting point, and
Okay.
then the budget debate ensues from there. And it may make it uglier next year, but
It's there.
it's there, right?
Okay.
It's no different than any other longer-term commitment.
All right, okay. Thank you. As I said, a
Yeah.
police officer was $67,000. I remember hearing that number come up. That's what we, well, there's, the next 2 years, there's 60K right there, half of an officer next year in the budget. And would you choose to pay for the cruiser or take a half an officer? I mean, it gets down, and what we've seen in the last three weeks or a month is, they want bodies. So, all right, I mean, that's fine. It's just, I agree. Once it's in, it's in.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Heather.
Any further discussion? I'm the guardian of the capital depreciation fund. Is there a motion?
Mark, I'd like to make a motion that we recommend approval.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
There's been a motion and a second. All in favor, Bill?
Favor,
Say again.
in favor.
Favor? Forrest?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Neil?
I'm going to abstain.
Heather?
Yes.
Mark abstains. Passes 4-2.
42.
Capital Article 15, which is highlighted regarding the ambulance. You recall, this is one that we also included in our report. And it's highlighted because last evening, Heather, there was mention that, my words, not anybody else's, somebody saying $450,000 might choke, but it really is 79,000, give or take, per year for 7 years. I think that has a more palatable, acceptable sell to it if it reads that way. Is it highlighted because you're looking into the possibility of including that language?
So it's highlighted because we wanted to get more clarification from legal based on last night. And then after a conversation with the town accountant today, we need a little more clarification. So my understanding of this article was essentially that we're putting it here so we can move forward with purchasing the ambulance. The ambulance, like every other piece of large equipment right now, is multi-years out. So 3 to 5 years before we even take ownership of the vehicle, and you don't start paying the lease till you take ownership. So the purpose of this article is to do a couple things. Number one, to say, yes, we can move forward and we can commit to ordering the ambulance and then, leasing it once it comes to us. The second piece is that our goal was to make sure we would like to, when talking to Mike, have enough money aside that each year we're actually able to pay for that lease out of the ambulance receipts. So it theoretically doesn't hit the operating budget, doesn't hit capital depreciation, doesn't hit the need for a debt exclusion, but something we can take care of through the natural billing cycle of the ambulance. The third piece is just, you see here, borrow up to $450,000 because we don't know what the exact cost is before essentially the fire chief enters into an agreement when he goes to order the ambulance. So this gives us a little leeway. When I talked to legal earlier today in correspondence, written correspondence, we were going back and forth. So he had a couple concerns, one being sometimes the lease agencies or even the agency just that sells the ambulance doesn't like to enter into an agreement unless there's actually an appropriation. So he had some concerns about that, and I sent an email to the fire chief that asked that question, which I think it likely will be okay based on what I've heard in the past, but we'll see how that goes. And then the second piece was the notion that, we're not going to have to pay these payments for several years. So I understand, the $79,000 per year piece, but I think the goal was to kind of hold off on figuring out those specific numbers until such time that the ambulance was actually in possession, because we don't know what's going to change at that point, right? The goal is to hopefully have enough in ambulance receipts to be able to pay those annual payments. But there's also always the ability that if we think about things ahead of time, we might be able to start putting that money aside. So when the ambulance does come in, we can pay a larger amount up front from ambulance receipts and then have smaller and fewer annual payments. So I understand the desire for a smaller number here, and we can totally put all of that in the description like I do on the one sheet handout that I bring to every town meeting, really explain what we're looking for and why we're doing it the way we're doing it. But in the meantime, the language of this is going to be, I believe, quite up to what legal recommends for modifications to make sure that both it meets our intent as well as it conforms with what Larissa, as the town accountant, needs in order to do the tax recap and set the tax rate. That also includes the town clerk being able to sign off on the article and the fact that there was nothing actually appropriated for a number at that piece, because we don't have $450,000 right now. So that's where the semantics come into play.
So Heather, a Reader's Digest version, in one form or another, essentially at the discretion of the fire department / fire chief, based on his best judgment and the flow of funds, it's still going to come out of ambulance receipts, not stabilization, not capital depreciation, and not budget. Is that correct?
That is the goal, yes?
I'm good.
Wait, I heard two things. Is that correct, or that's the goal? I mean, the goal incorrect? If the goal is not met, then there has to be Plan B.
That's so Neil, it's a two-piece goal, right? The first goal is just in general. I'd like to make the payments out of ambulance receipts.
Understood.
For appropriation starting in whatever year we take possession, which shouldn't be an issue, right?
Correct.
The second goal is that hopefully before that time even comes, we'll start to have enough ambulance receipts that we're not using every single year that we can put aside to start building up a balance to pay as essentially a down payment when it becomes available. But yes, we intend to, we will be paying for this out of ambulance receipts. How's that?
That's fine.
And I would, I would hope that right in the beginning of each budget year, the amount to pay for this would be parked aside in the ambulance receipt budget, and then as we do in this year and future years, we would work on where the rest of it's going to go.
That's fine.
Right?
Okay. But,
Yep.
I mean, I heard two different answers there. I heard correct, and then I
Yep.
heard that's the goal.
Yeah.
So it was,
She gave us the one we wanted to hear, but she couched it a little bit.
yeah, okay, all right, okay.
I mean,
Good work, Heather. Is there a motion
I'll make a motion
to?
to approve the article as written.
Good. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
One question. I know in the past they had used Holden Hospital funding. Is that at all available anymore, or is that closed off?
There is something on the website under special revenue that includes the Holden Hospital Fund. I don't know exactly what the balance is.
So I can explain this one a little bit, Mark, if that's okay.
Yes.
So what we've been doing in the past when we leased a vehicle, the ambulance, right? We would pay for the town's portion, we would split it between the town's operating budget and the Holden Hospital. What ends up happening though is the town will, normally appropriates the amount, 20-something thousand in May. July 1st comes, we have access to that money. And the payment is due like on July 1st. However, we don't get the Holden Hospital check for 7, 14, 15 plus days. Every single year, whoever's been in my position has to write to the leasing company to explain why our funding is being held up and why we haven't issued a check yet. So that is why, we kind of shifted things a little bit this year and asked for just the full cost of the payment and the operating budget, so we don't have that. The town can always go back and, utilize or have the fire chief utilize the Holden Hospital funds in a different way. But at least for right now, that's not always the best to rely on for payments unless you let it build over time, which you could do as well.
Good point. Good point.
Any further discussion? Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor, Bill?
Yes.
Forrest?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Neil?
Yes.
Heather?
Yes. Yes.
Mark votes yes. Okay, I think that concludes our portion of the warrant articles. Is that correct, Heather?
That is.
Good. So back to our particular agenda. One of them speaks about future CIPC meeting dates. The Charter Review Committee has extended an invitation graciously on a number of occasions that just couldn't really coordinate with our schedule nor with the Finance Committee's schedule. But my question is, I want to ask you before I ask them. Their meeting Monday, June 9th at 5:45 is, and I'm sure they would need to conduct their business even if they're okay with it. So maybe we could say 6. Is that something that this committee could consider attending, in which case I would post a meeting, or maybe it's just we're invited and we don't need a formal meeting and whoever can attend can attend? So I'm throwing that out for
What date?
feedback so that I can get back to them.
Next Monday?
Yeah, we have a planning board meeting, and
Yeah.
because this building is tied up with charter review, and then I believe it is select board.
Yeah, we would be meeting with.
No, I understand, but we're at the John Bauer building. So it's not like it's right here and then you adjourn one and then we just turn the other one over. So, I mean, David, if you feel you can do it, then, I mean, David and I have already had the pleasure
I
of meeting
was-
with charter review through planning. They were
Yeah.
come to the planning board.
Yeah, and I met with them independently because I was a candidate.
Okay,
So I would say, pick a date and time that is independent of other meetings going on, and we'll get who we can get from this meeting. I mean, if it's available, I'll be there. If everybody can't make it, well, the people who can do make it, right?
But you're both saying that the 9th is going to be challenging.
Yeah, we
It
got
will be.
planning board and
Okay.
other meetings here, and we're running around, so, yeah, it's not going to work.
Last item, I think that we have time on our agenda, Heather, is our bylaws have left this committee, and at one particular time, they were in emails and on screens at a select board meeting. Can you give an update as to what the status of those are?
The select board have the bylaw recommendations. I think their last intent when they met, recalling that it was a 3-member board at the time, was to think about them more for the fall.
For the fall.
So is that something that I should communicate with the select board chair and ask for a status?
Yes.
Okay. So, there is a little bit of setup time that Scott needs for the 7 o'clock meeting. I've been told it's 5 or 10 minutes, so we have 5 minutes or so. If there's anything under old business, new business, etc. Hearing
Is
none.
the DPW still getting their lift?
They actually got it out of the, there is a good point. They got it out of health insurance account.
Okay.
There's a thing called year-end transfers, and there's excess money there, and vote was made to transfer it to DPW to buy the lift.
Because if they didn't, somebody might have got hurt and the insurance rates would go
There you
up.
go.
What about those trucks you wanted?
And Heather, have they taken delivery of the lift, DPW?
I believe they have.
Good.
Okay, so, good. And unfortunately, in our report, which it can't go to be a warrant article if it's not in the report, but one of our items was for DPW vehicles to the tune of $220,000. That was eliminated by the select board. Recall that we had asked that it be considered under a debt exclusion, and decision was made literally in this room in a joint meeting of the Finance Committee and Select Board not to go forward with that, because it would, if it would forward as we proposed, it would compete with the override, and didn't want to risk that to be the case, so it was tabled. So unfortunately, I think that was in desperate need of some help. And some of the vehicles were either out of service or should be out of service, or were in repair or disrepair. But for lack of a better word, the pause button has been hit on that.
Good thing
Not
they-
subject to our vote or our approval, because they can ignore something in our report. Ignore is probably the wrong word to use, but that's what happened. They ignored our recommendation.
Good thing they got the lift.
Yeah, to be able to repair what we have.
Now they don't have any vehicles to put on the lift.
When we spoke to him when he was here, head of DPW, I thought he said he had $350,000 left over, and then he was getting another $190,000. What are they gonna use that money for?
That's Chapter 90 funds,
Yeah,
and
what are they
that's
gonna do with
limited for paving.
Yeah.
Paving? Okay. You know, a blacktop there.
Paving and trucks that are dedicated for paving.
Only
You
paving.
can't buy a
Only
snowplow with that. Yeah.
We've tried line painting, guardrails, small equipment. It's got to be vehicles and equipment dedicated to
Yep.
/ road work, paving. Road work gives us an opening, but paving closes the opening.
So I'm assuming that this need will be presented at the special town meeting in the fall. We can only hope. However,
I
The-
don't know
we're
what
up-
it's going to be,
Okay.
because we do this report annually.
so because we sent it on, is that something that can be considered in the fall, or do we have to have another meeting if the select board
I
asks?
think there's a perfect reason for us to convene again and submit a second report.
Okay,
At a
because,
special town meeting, yeah.
well, the reason I'm at was, we're up against the clock. I mean, we heard from the DPW director that sometimes delivery could be 18 months, so even if it gets approved in November, I mean, that's for new vehicles, and we were having serious consideration or discussions about finding something in the used market, which would be, you have a check, you look at it, I'll take it, and it's there, and you're ready to go. But some of the equipment, I believe that he may have been researching, would require additional work to be ready. In other words, it may not have a dump body on it, or it may not have a plow frame, but the truck could handle something like that. And that would extend sometime the possession date to take for use, and I just hate to think that we're relying on the middle of November as the date to move forward for the snow season at that point, when it's an urgent need, so,
But I would footnote that, you're saying November would be late. It's possible that it doesn't even get on the table for November.
understood.
So maybe we can convene later on and issue a second report. I don't think anything in our bylaws precludes that,
Nope.
so we may want to consider that. Because I think the need was urgently expressed,
Yes.
for sure. Any new business, old business? Public comment?
None here, sir. Good evening.
No public comment?
No public comment.
Okay.
Okay.
Is there a
I'll motion to adjourn.
motion to adjourn has been made? Second.
Second.
Any discussion? None. All in favor? Bill?
Aye.
Boris?
I
David?
Aye.
Neil?
Aye.
Heather?
Aye.
Mark votes aye.
Okay.
We stand adjourned. Thank you all.
Okay.